Bienvenidos a nuestro cuarto episodio de Guáchame Testimonios of Resiliencia. My name is Rosario Dominguez.
And I'm Nancy Dominguez Fret. Today with us we have Massiel Zaragoza. She's going to share her journey of becoming a bilingual educator and also a published author for children's bilingual books. So we're really excited.
Yes, so a little bit about Massiel. She's a bilingual education teacher with over 15 years of experience. She has worked as a middle school and high school Spanish teacher, ESL teacher, curriculum coordinator, bilingual coordinator, and IB coordinator at a dual language school. Her work in dual language coordination has pushed her to pursue a PhD in curriculum and instruction, where she has recently completed her second year of doctoral studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And her research interests are focused on the sustainability of secondary dual language programs. She was actually born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and came to Chicago with her parents and siblings as a child.
Yes, and we're so excited because Maciel is actually launching her books this summer. And they're, like I said, they're bilingual children's books. And they're titled Mi Prima Isleña y Yo, y Somos Gemelas Pero No Somos Idénticas. And these books were awesomely inspired by her children. She's growing multicultural and bilingual children. So they were inspired by her experiences with her children. And Maciel, thank you so much for joining us today. We wanted to get started with a question about like your childhood and sort of your background. So I don't know if you could share a little bit about your background and your experience migrating from Puerto Rico to the States when you were a child.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having me. So as you mentioned in the biography, my background is in education. I became a teacher in 2004. And I've taught Spanish and ESL basically to people of all ages, but again, mostly in middle school and high school. But for the last 4 years, my role has shifted to a coordinator / leadership role. And I've worked in dual language program coordination. And as you know, Nancy, I'm doing the PhD in curriculum and instruction from UIC. And I'm doing that because I really wanted to do research and work that helps support the expansion of dual language programs, especially those that are at the middle and high school level, because there aren't that very many of them. And right now, in addition to going to school, as was mentioned in the biography, I'm working as a middle school coordinator at a school called Academy for Global Citizenship that's located on the southwest side of Chicago. And I also recently launched a blog called Brilliant Biliterates, where my mission is to document my experiences as a bilingual educator and a bilingual parent. And through that platform, I hope to create bilingual resources for parents in dual language schools. And as you mentioned, I'm in the process of self-publishing 2 bilingual children's books, and I'll talk more about those as the interview progresses. And then with regard to my personal background and my upbringing, as you mentioned, I was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Before marrying my mom, my dad had 3 children of his own, but in their relationship, they had 3 children, and I'm the middle child of that relationship, of their marriage. And as a child and before coming to the United States, I grew up in a middle-class home with my parents. My mother came from more humble beginnings. She was one of 8 children, but she was, and she still is, an extremely hard worker. And I feel that I definitely acquired my work ethic and my determination from her. She was the first of her siblings to finish school. She was really self-motivated. And in order to be able to go to school, she had to leave her parents to go live with an aunt in the capital so that she could have the opportunity to attend school. So my mother put herself through college, and eventually she built a home for her parents and even obtained a master's degree. So needless to say, my mom was definitely the person. I love my father too, but my mom was the one that really influenced me to work very hard to pursue an education. And she always encouraged me and my siblings to continue pushing ourselves and to continue improving ourselves and to improve our lives. And she would say that even when things get tough, when people try to bring you down or discredit you or stifle your voice, to just continue pushing forward and continue learning every day. My family came to Chicago around the late 80s, early 90s. And I remember that it was in the middle of winter around Christmas time. And I remember that it was snowing a lot. I remember that all 5 of us were sleeping on a mattress on the floor. I remember going to school and trying to speak to some of the kids in Spanish and then having them respond to me in English. I remember listening to Mexican Spanish for the first time and knowing that it was different. And I remember asking a teacher, or actually it was a teacher that asked me to do something, and she told me, ahorita, and I didn't move. And so then she raised her voice and she singled with her finger, ahorita. And I was like, oh, I thought you meant ahorita, as in later. So like coming here and learning the differences in Spanish and dialects was definitely interesting. And I remember the first time eating a tamal at a Mexican neighbor's birthday party and not knowing how to eat it. So I started eating it with the shell until someone told me, no, no, así no se come. And I had to stop. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit about my background, just educationally and then personally, how I came to this country and just some of the, the little things that happened to me when I first came here. And then just, my mom and her background and how she basically influenced me to become the person that I am today.
So you talked a little bit about the cultural shocks, maybe the cultural differences that you noticed right away when you came. What about in school? Like, how did migrating from Puerto Rico to the U.S. How did that affect you in your education?
Yeah, so at school, like I mentioned, I remember that I felt strange when I talked to other children at school. And I tried to talk to them in Spanish and they didn't respond to me in Spanish. And then noticing that everything was in English. So that I would go home and I'd, watch telenovelas, Primer Impacto, Cristina, Sábado Gigante, the programs that were really popular at the time when I was growing up. And that's what I was exposed to at home. But then at school, it was obviously very different. And I recall having an internal conversation with myself, basically telling myself that I needed to reinvent who I was. And that this whole thing of not being able to understand what was going on, it just wasn't going to work for me because I've always been someone who I don't like to be left out of the loop. I'm kind of a teacher in that sense. And I knew that I needed to shift gears and do something different because otherwise I was going to be left out and I was going to be left behind. So I remember between the ages of 9 and 13, I really started to watch all sorts of like popular English movies. Thankfully, we had cable at home, listening to popular music in English, learning about American popular culture. In school, I would get involved in everything. I started to get involved in everything like music, drama, choir, student council, you name it. And basically immersing myself in all of those different contexts and language experiences, because I mean, like the language you use, like in a music class will be different to drama, it should be different to student council. So basically putting myself in those different contexts allowed me to learn a lot of language. And I was a sponge because I wanted to learn. And I can imagine that that's probably what my mother went through when she was basically the same age and she was a child. And she said to herself, I'm going to leave my family so that I can go to school and better myself. So I feel that it was kind of like history repeating itself. What I went through is basically what my mom went through. And it paid off because within that span of time of 4 years, I excelled academically. I ended up graduating valedictorian of my 8th grade class, being a former ELL, I got into Lane Tech, which is a very selective high school in the city of Chicago. I went to college. I was the first one of my siblings to get a bachelor's degree, then a master's degree, and now I'll be the first one in my family to get a PhD. So I feel that definitely moving to a new place and having to adapt linguistically and culturally, it developed a sense of resilience and grit that I still have to this day, because resilience is definitely a trait that my husband and I try to instill in our daughters because they're growing up a lot more privileged than we did. But they still need to learn how to be independent. They need to learn how to face obstacles head on. They need to learn how to pick themselves up when they fall down. So really, there's two great things that came out of me moving, of the move, and that I recognize to this day. And it's basically that I learned to be adaptable and I learned to be resilient. But then the one major drawback from that move is that in that desire to adapt and to assimilate, I put all of my emphasis on learning English to adapt and survive to my environment, that I subconsciously started to put English before Spanish for a period of time. So what ended up happening through middle school and high school is that I was so focused on keeping up academically in English that I did end up suffering through a period of language loss. And I didn't realize that until I went to college. So from there, I had some sort of epiphany, and I basically decided that I wanted to become a bilingual educator so that I could go to communities and message to kids that were growing up that are growing up basically like I grew up, to message to them that they could be resilient and they could be adaptable, but that they shouldn't do it at the expense of losing something that is at the end of the day is priceless, which is basically your language, your cultural identity. It's priceless. So that's another thing that we're trying to instill in our daughters, who we're trying to raise to be bilingual and multicultural, because we speak Spanish at home, and this is why. And I don't take the approach of like obligating them to speak Spanish, because I don't want to create any animosity or resentment towards learning the language. Because I've seen that happen many, many times with former students, that once they get to a certain age, they refuse to speak Spanish. So rather, what we do is that we have repeated conversations about why they need to practice. Like, why do you need to practice? And, I use myself as an example. And if you don't practice something, you'll end up losing it. So yeah, basically in a nutshell, my experience had a lot of impact on me, both positive and negative, with regard to education and then my language development and the development of my identity.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like a lot of people could probably sort of resonate with what you said, right? Like those experiences of having to adapt, having to figure out on your own at such a young age how to, the system out basically to be successful. So how do you remember when your love for writing began? Like, I know that you've been writing for a while, right? But like, do you have like a vivid memory of when you said like, this is something I enjoy. I want to be a writer, right?
Absolutely. Yes, I do. So when we came to live in Chicago, we ended up moving to a not so good neighborhood. It was on the northwest side of Chicago. At the time, there were a lot of gangs in the neighborhood and a lot of crime. And my mom didn't let us go outside and play. So we basically had to be inside all day. And being inside all day forced me to be very creative. My brother and we would do a lot of pretend play. And we would like play, detectives, or sometimes I would do like a radio show, kind of like how you guys are doing now. But then on my own, I loved to write stories. So what I would do is that I would write my own children's books, and I would like staple the pages together and like make a little book. And then sometimes I would write the stories, and my brother, who was a really good artist, he would draw the pictures for me. And it was really funny because I would generally write stories about animal characters who were friends. And then they would have some type of adventure. And then at the end of their adventure, they would reward themselves like, oh, we did it. We beat the bad guy. And now we're going to go to McDonald's, and we're going to go to Burger King, or go to Dairy Queen. Because my mom, she never took us to those restaurants. And then, us being the sheltered kids we would see those commercials and we would want to go. And my mom was also one of those moms that we'd ask her, Mom, podemos ir a McDonald's? And she would say, aquí tienes tu McDonald's. And then she would give us like chuletas or something. We'd be like, this is a McDonald's, so definitely my love for writing was born I would say at that time. But I also loved reading at a very early age. My mom did buy us a lot of Spanish books and workbooks. She was the one that taught me how to read when I was 4. So reading books and reading different types of books also gave me a lot of different ideas on like, okay, I'm going to write a book about this, And then also when I was at school, it was my 7th grade teacher who really began to notice that I had a knack for writing. And she, to this day, is still my favorite teacher. Her name was Miss Pedersen. She was the one that inspired me to be a teacher and to be a writer. So her basically what she would do is that she would give the class like these grammar assignments or language arts assignments. And when I would complete them, she would say, okay, now I want you to write an essay about this. So she would give me an essay topic to complete. So she taught me how to write different types of texts, like persuasive essays and expository and things like that. And she would put my essays in contests and I won, in seventh and eighth grade. And then, in high school, I didn't really have a mentor like her, but I excelled in my English classes, my language classes. I won a couple of other essay contests and things like that. So the love for writing has always been there. It started as a child from my experiences, being at home with my brother, mentors that I had at school. So, yeah.
So we've discussed, your background on bilingual education, and also we mentioned you're a mom of 4 beautiful daughters. So how did those 2 factors influence your decision to pursue publishing a children's book?
Wow, there's a lot. Okay, so I can start with my experience as a teacher first. So when I first became a high school Spanish teacher, I became a teacher around a time before social media, before like shared resources, because like nowadays there's like groups for everything and like you share resources and super easy. Before dual language programs became as popular as they are now. At that time, I had to create my own resources. I mean, I taught IB Spanish early on in my career, and there wasn't a single book published for IB Spanish. So for the first 7 years of my career, I had to create all of my resources. And if I wanted my native students, my native Spanish speaking students or heritage speakers, which is what they're called now, if I wanted them to read some literature, it was so hard to find something. And if I did find something, a lot of times it was like really challenging, way over their head. So I ended up doing a master's program in literacy, hoping that I would get some guidance and some best practices on how to help my students develop their Spanish literacy skills. And again, I had to adapt because when I was in my classes in that program, everything was about English language arts, and everything was like, for the most part, I would say 90% was geared towards elementary school. So I had to like take it and tweak it and adapt it to Spanish and then middle school and high school. So needless to say, my experiences of just not having access to resources was like a sign. It was like some sort of sign that I needed to do something. It was like a message, because I'm a believer that if something continues to happen in your life, like if it's a recurring event, I mean, that's probably like the universe trying to tell you something. So the way that I started to interpret it was, maybe the universe is saying, well, what you're looking for doesn't seem to exist. Therefore, maybe you should create it. And then as a parent, I started to see the same dynamics pan out when my daughters were born. So my husband and I committed to speaking Spanish exclusively at home with our girls. And that implied reframing our entire environment and our space so that it was completely conducive to Spanish immersion. So that meant TV, movies, books, everything had to be in Spanish. And with my first daughter, I noticed then it's a lot easier. It's getting easier now. I definitely see like a boom of resources, but it was harder then to find Spanish books. And I would buy whatever I could. And then there were times when I would just buy an English book, and then I'm like reading it to her when she's going to bed, but I'm like translating the book in Spanish as I'm reading it. So my desire to publish bilingual books is definitely a combination of my love for writing, my experiences growing up and having to juggle between the 2 languages myself, my experiences as a frustrated bilingual teacher who struggled to find the resources, and now as a mother who wants to make sure that her daughters have access to all of the things that my husband and I didn't have access to when we were growing up. So yeah, needless to say, I want them to continue to have access now, but also when they get older too, which is a different thing. It's a different element, because right now they're small and they need the types of books that I'm publishing now. But at some point, they'll be in middle school and high school, and they'll need different types of resources. So I definitely have it in the back of my mind that I want to continue to write. I want to continue to write bilingual books for children, but also for older children and adolescents, because there's definitely a need for it.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's so hard to find those resources, and specifically like about the experiences of bilingual children here in the U.S., right? So with that said, what's unique about your books? ¿De qué se tratan tus libros? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I have two books. One of them, like you mentioned, is called Mi prima isleña y yo. And then so the title is in Spanish at the top and English at the bottom. So one thing that's definitely unique about this book, well, it's bilingual Spanish and English, but what I did intentionally is that I put the Spanish first. A lot of times I see bilingual texts that have the English text first and then the Spanish underneath, but I did it the other way around. So I put the Spanish in the forefront and then the English underneath, kind of like as a point. Um, so there's that. But this book is about two cousins that are Puerto Rican. One of them is from the island and the other one is from the States. So it kind of touches on what you just mentioned, Nancy, what happens, like what the upbringing is like for a child who grows up in the United States. So basically the book is kind of like sharing a little bit of the journey of both of them, like parallel. Okay, this is what the cousin does in Puerto Rico, and this is what the one in the United States does, and kind of like a little bit of back and forth. So you could see the similarities, but then you could also see how their identities are developing in a way different from one another. And then the other book, so this one is also, again, it's inspired by my two older daughters. So in the inside, there's like a dedication to them. You'll see their names on the inside. And the illustrator, I also I wanted the illustrator to capture what they look like. So one of them looks like my older daughter and the other one looks like my middle daughter. So like this book was like dedicated to them. And then the other book was dedicated to my twins. So I'm a twin mom. So I also kind of like took a twin spin because there aren't a lot of books about twins and the experience of being a twin and of having twins and what that entails. So what I did with this book, and it's called Somos Gemelas pero no somos idénticas, is that it explores multicultural identity. And the main characters are twin girls, twin sisters, who obviously do not look alike on the outside, and on the inside, they're very different as well. So it touches about why they're different in terms of their multicultural identity, and yeah, how we are all unique. So I think that, with that, I think, it makes these two books, it gives it a different type of spin. So I definitely wanted to showcase that. Another thing is that I've noticed that what I wanted to do is that a lot of the bilingual books that I have seen tend to be translations from books that were originally translated in English. So you'll have a book like, I think it's called Dragons Love Tacos, right? It was originally written in English, but then it was translated in Spanish, and I bought it in Spanish version, but it was originally done in English. So, and as a dual language educator, I also see that. I see a lot of books that are original English and they're translated to Spanish. But then I also wanted to do something different because the books that are written in Spanish in the United States are also geared more towards Mexican culture, which makes sense because Mexicans are the largest population of Latinos in this country, making up more than 60%. So in these books, I wanted to showcase other cultures. So that's something also that I want to strive to do with my books, is that I want to highlight how Latinos come in different colors. They could be blonde, they could be redheads, they could have curly hair, they could have straight hair. They talk differently, they use different words. So I definitely wanted to highlight that point as well with my books.
How difficult was it for you to embark in this self-publishing journey? And the other part to this question would be any advice, consejos for aspiring writers?
It was definitely scary. And I'm still kind of going through, I'm going through the motions. Like some days I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing this. Like, I'm really doing this. I can't believe it. I've done this. I've gotten so far. And then there are other days that I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? There's no way I can do this. It's super competitive. And so, yeah, it's definitely, scary, and being willing to take that risk and know that some days you're going to have your good days, some days you're going to have your bad days. So it's like been an internal struggle, because as much as I love writing and I love being creative, this is the first time that I'm like bearing my soul, and publishing something for the world to see. So it's, no es cualquier cosa, it's definitely something that you have to be okay with. Like, you're going to showcase this to the world, and people are going to read this, and it's going to be a representation of you. But at the same time, I have to remind myself that this is something that I've always wanted to do. And now, with so many outlets that allow for self-publishing, it makes it more possible, because I never thought that I could do this. The publishing industry was very homogeneous, not very diverse. And there wasn't a lot of access, and there still isn't, to a great extent, a lot of access to writers of color, writers of different cultural backgrounds. So yeah, that definitely for a long time discouraged me, and made me feel like this dream was not possible. But thankfully, with self-publishing and social media and just people putting themselves out there and saying, hey, I have a voice, I have a story, I want to tell it, you know, um, it makes it less scary. So that is definitely something that has been really supportive, like supporting me and encouraging me along the way, that through this experience, I have opened up my circle and my world to so many talented people. Because before, I was in my teacher bubble, just associating with other educators. And then when I became a mom, there was the circle opened up a little bit to associate with other moms and their experiences. And now as a writer, I'm talking to other writers and learning about their struggles and their stories, and just reading about what they're doing. It inspires me and it motivates me to continue. So definitely, as hard as it is, I would encourage people to do it, to write, to do whatever they want to do. Because it's much better to like go through the fear, push yourself through it, get to the other side and say, hey, I did this, than constantly question your abilities, and just kind of like giving into fear that you can't, do it. And then as far as the process itself, for anybody that would want to become a self-published author, I would just say create a very solid plan and a timeline to get this done. So for me, it took me roughly a year to get to where I am now. And I'm surprised I got 2 books done in a year, but I did pace myself, having a full-time job and being a mom and all that I was able to get it done. But the experience has definitely taught me, like, okay, for my next book, maybe I want to stretch out the time a little bit further, maybe give myself more time for the illustration component, maybe give myself more time to market, because there's different elements as well. Like, the easiest part was definitely writing the stories, so you write your stories. I shared my stories with the manuscripts with my husband, and he's like my biggest critic, so I was like, if he doesn't like them, no one's like them. So I shared them with him, and he's like, why didn't you tell me about this? And he gave me the green light to move forward. And then I started little by little, just like hitting these benchmarks, getting the illustrator, formatting the books, finding out about this, finding out about that. So definitely I would tell an aspiring writer to get all of the components, the elements into place, solidify a plan, a timeline, pace yourself, and then also just be ready to know that there will be ups and downs. So
Perfect. 2 things. How can we purchase your books? And also, would you like to give us like a sneak peek of your books? Would you like to read a little bit from one of them? Completely up to you.
yeah, for sure. So on June 12th and June 13th, so the weekend of Saturday, June 12th and Sunday, June 13th, I will be at an event. I'm organizing an event with another Chicago teacher author who recently published a book about, it's called The Children's Guide to Rap and Saving the World. It's really cute. So I'm partnering up with this author. His name is Luis Rodriguez. And we are organizing an event in the Pilsen Arts Community House. It's from 12 to 5. We're each going to do like a little book reading. We'll have books available printed to sell to anybody that attends. There'll be food, there'll be music, there'll be activities for kids. So it's like a family event. So that'll be like the first time that I'll be sharing my books like in an open forum. But in addition to that, the books will be available as of June 12th on Amazon. So the books will be available on paperback, hardcover, and ebook. So, and then as far as reading a section, I think I'll read the one about the twins, just so you can get a little taste of how the story flows. So at the beginning of the book, what ends up happening is that the twins are in different spaces, and something that I experienced a lot as a twin mom, and having twins that didn't exactly look alike, is that people would often like kind of look at us and like in confusion, like, are they twins? You know, and I would have to be like, yes, they are, and explain all these things. So that's kind of like how the book starts, that someone's like, son gemelas, pero no se parecen. Tú eres alta y tú eres baja. And then you see the twins. Son gemelas, pero no se parecen. Tú tienes la piel blanca y tú tienes la piel morena. So you're twins, but you don't look alike. You have white skin and you have brown skin. So one is tall, one is short, the other one is light skin, and the other is brown skin, but they're twins, right? Son gemelas, pero no se parecen. Tu pelo es oscuro y ondulado y el tuyo es claro y lacio. You're twins, but you don't look alike. Your hair is dark and wavy and yours is light and straight. Son gemelas, pero no se parecen. Tú eres muy sociable, pero tú eres muy tímida. So that's how the book starts, with a couple of like people comparing them and what they think they should look like, because they're twins. Because they're twins, they're supposed to be the same, right? But people are kind of like confused, and they're asking, well, you're twins, but there's this and there's that. So
thank you so much for sharing. It's so cool to get to know more about your journey, and specifically this self-publishing, journey that you have embarked on this whole year. I'm sure a lot of like children, youth, and adults who are aspiring writers will learn a lot from you, and hopefully reach out for more consejitos and networking.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for being here with us.
Again, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the space and the conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, I already know Sophia's gonna love the books.
Yes.
She's gonna be able to relate for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much everyone else for watching, if you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify. We are happy to share one more great story. Remember to follow us on all our social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, again, YouTube, Spotify, and we will see you next time for another episode.
Muchas gracias. Nos
Hasta
vemos.
luego.
Adiós.